We all know the story of Peter's confession of the identity of Christ as found in Mark 8. Let's look at it again. It says, "Now Jesus and his disciples set out for the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And along the way he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say that I am?' They said in reply, 'John the Baptist. Still others Elijah. Still others one of the prophets.' And he asked them, 'But who do you say that I am?' And Peter said to him in reply, 'You are the Christ, the Son of the living God.' He warned them not to tell anyone about it. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer greatly and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, and be killed, and rise after 3 days. He spoke this openly. But then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. And at this he turned around and, looking at his disciples, rebuked Peter and said, 'Get behind me, Satan. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do.' He summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, 'Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and that of the gospel will save it. What profit is there for one to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? What could one give in exchange for his life? Whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this faithless and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels.'" Now, naturally, this story is an awesome story. But I don't think we've ever grasped the full weight of it. I mean, every time I've ever seen Hollywood play this out, it's been with the apostles and Jesus sitting around a campfire somewhere in the dead of night. Hollywood has it like they were all alone. But let me paint for you the actual scene. The most prominent structure at Caesarea Philippi is a cave. And the cave was, during the time of Christ, a temple to the Greek god Pan. Pan was the god, among other things, of hunting, herding, spiritual, and sexual possession. Those who worship Pan would get involved in all sorts of hedonistic, fleshly, unsavory rituals. The worst part of their worship is that sometimes they would literally jump off a cliff to sacrifice themselves to Pan. Since the coastline is not that large, it's believed that Jesus was in very close proximity to that cave when he confronted his apostles with that now famous question, "Who do you say that I am?" There are two thoughts I have here. One is that as we get closer to Easter, I think it's important that we each answer the question of who we say Jesus is. And secondly, knowing how the scene actually occurred puts a variety of things into a different perspective. First of all, I think it puts Peter's boldness into perspective. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that observation of these Pan worshippers carrying on in such a wild, outlandish fashion had to be uncomfortable, had to be awkward, had to be freaky, had to be even fearful, downright scary. And here's Jesus challenging his apostles to be bold and stand up and say who he is. Come on, guys. You know who I am. And right here, in front of all this paganism, all this wickedness, say it. Who do you say that I am? Some say you're John the Baptist. Some say you're Elijah. Yeah, and then oh wow, no, it's hot. Some say you're one of the prophets. And all this time, there's screaming, yelling, ghastly activity taking place within just a few feet of where they are. Come on, guys, you know it, and I need you to say it. Who do you say that I am? And there stands Peter, in an act of desperation, calling out in a voice mixed with boldness and fear at the same time. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And though the Bible doesn't indicate one way or another, I like to think that the remaining apostles got incredibly quiet. The ritualistic chants and activities occur in a loud, outlandish fashion, but right around that campfire, all eyes are on Peter. See, it's real easy to speak for Jesus in the church auditorium. It's real easy to say, "Go Jesus!" in a youth rally. It's real easy to lift up songs of worship, but that's what the rest of the crowd is doing. But what about when we're in the thick of it all? When the world with all of its inconsistencies, perversion, garbage surrounds us. Then it's not so easy. We come up with the flimsiest excuses not to stand up for Jesus. We use political correctness, and we don't want to offend our neighbors because, after all, we have to live with them. And yet, if there ever was a time to end milk toast, namby-pamby Christianity, it's now. We're in the midst of a world that is dominated by the people of the cave of Pan than the war around the campfire of Christ. And Christ is saying to us, in the midst of all the garbage that is going on in our world, in the midst of a rising abortion rate, in the midst of a rising teen suicide rate, in the midst of rising amounts of perversion and garbage, in the midst of people wanting to take God out of the very equation, Jesus is saying to us who are believers, acknowledge me right now. In the midst of all this perversion, acknowledge who I am. You know what else we learn from this scene? We see what the church is supposed to be all about. I can imagine that right after Peter made this incredibly bold statement that all the apostles fixed their eyes on Jesus. I mean, what would he say? Mark doesn't record his response, but Matthew does. I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail. When I first discovered what I'm about to share, I found myself running around the house excited to tell my wife my discovery. And here's that discovery. You know where Jesus was first establishing his church? It wasn't in the Trinity suburbs, but it was among the people with whom the apostles would be most comfortable. It was right in the heart of wickedness, degradation, and sin. One of my contemporary heroes of the faith is W.A. Crystal. During his 50-year ministry as pastor of First Baptist Dallas, he was asked time and time again to sell their church plant in the heart of downtown and move to the suburbs. Time and time again, he refused. He said that downtown needed a church because it was where Wall Street met Skid Row, where the most ministry could be done. We live in a day and age where we forget that our only target group needs to be the lost. It doesn't matter what age, what income level, what demographic, what part of town, what skin tone, what style of hair, or anything else. What matters is that the church remain as a lighthouse to everyone who doesn't know Jesus. And there's nothing to be afraid of. Why? Because in this scripture, we find the ultimate promise of protection. I got an email one time from someone putting down the use of PowerPoint and visual aid, saying that we don't need to be given to such devices to present the gospel because Jesus didn't do it. And I agree. I researched it. Jesus did not use PowerPoint, but he used even more radical means. After telling Peter, on this rock I will build my church, he uses a visual aid by pointing to that cave and saying, not even the gates of hell will prevail against it. See all the decadence and celebrating going on, Peter? Don't worry. You're on the right side. They won't last, Peter, but I am everlasting. You know what Jesus was ultimately saying to his apostles on the coast of Caesarea Philippi? I need your boldness. You know what he's saying to the churches today? The very same